I'm Carrie, and I'm the Executive Director of Daughters of Tomorrow. We're a charity in Singapore that's focused on enabling low-income women into employment. So it's really fitting that we are invited on this team. Thank you, Maybank, for inviting us. I think just to give you a little bit of background, when we talk about employability, we want to point your attention to the community that we are enabling. And this is a community that has largely been invisible before we came on the scene. They are made up of there's about 25,000 women in Singapore who currently or has been living off financial assistance. And I think employability is a very key thing that we need to enable for them in order for them to not have to depend on financial assistance. This is some basic demography about them. 40% or more are actually single mothers. There's a small percentage who are actually migrant mothers here in Singapore with Singaporean children, and they're trying to find a way to make ends meet. Okay, so between 2015 and now, we're actually having our 5th birthday. I think we need to update the figures. More than 800 women have come through and received our services, and we've helped more than 200 of them find successful employment just in 2018, where we really were able to kind of scale up for a full-on operation. We helped 140. I think the question is, why were these women previously seen by many different help agencies as cannot make it, or we tried to help them but they don't seem to be helpable? So there were a lot of, I think, undiscovered barriers that people didn't know about them. So, of course, as part of our work, we realized that just working on the women was not sufficient. We also had to work with employers and help them to understand the circumstances of these women whom they intend to contribute to the workforce, to hire to contribute to their businesses. And I think through a lot of empathy building and sensitization work, we managed to onboard, I think right now we have more than 80 or 90 employer partners from various industries. And just last year, through our employer advocacy work, headed up by my colleague Fanny here, we managed to get employers to adopt very different workplace practices that they haven't changed. This has been around for like 20, 30 years in various industries, like retail and F&B and services, right? Rostering their staff. We managed to get them to adopt a different way of scheduling their staff, which is what we call core and stable scheduling, to allow mothers to work within the window of time in a day where they actually have tangible childcare support. So I think based on Daughters of Tomorrow's journey, we want to share a perspective that I think in a kind of very productivistic environment in Singapore, right, we talk about skills future, and we talk about skills a lot when we talk about employability. Of course, employability is a lot about skills, but I think when we look at the workforce, they are made out of human beings, just like what Melissa mentioned, right? So other than skills, we need to look at what is their readiness level, and there's so many dimensions of that. And I think even more importantly, having the benefit to work with and journey with the women on the ground, we realize that confidence is a very key thing, right? And the other thing, social connectedness. This is support. What kind of support do they really need? Is it the role of the government or the employer or the women themselves who need to find a way to support themselves? There are all these questions, right? And of course, social connectedness. Hopefully later during Q&A, I have the chance to elaborate more on these things. But I think through our work the past few years, we managed to advocate for a lot of changes. As you can see, there's improved housing that we managed to achieve with advocacy work with AWARE, so that single parents have better housing, because housing is a form of support. Without stable housing, nobody can be in the right mind to perform at work. And the other thing is enhanced childcare subsidy. I think before this enhancement to the policy, we noticed that women were only able to get subsidized childcare when they have achieved employment. But what was forgotten was that there's a journey before they can enter employment, which is a whole journey of months of training or interviews. And we reflected this to the relevant departments, and the government was very responsive to help with this enhancement in the policy. And thirdly, I mentioned this earlier, core and stable scheduling, which is the advocacy we do with the private sector and many businesses that can enable them to benefit from harnessing this workforce. So lastly, I think when we talk about employability, I think we often think that, okay, through employability, through employment, people get the means to become socially mobile, right? They begin to have better lives. But I think we also need to look at it as a two-way journey. Because when people have better lives, that's when better aspirations, higher aspirations are set for themselves, for their children. And because with that, then the aspirations lead to the motivation to enhance their talents, to develop different skills and potentials in themselves that really then in the end, businesses can benefit from tapping from. Yeah, thank you. Did I overshot my time?
You're doing good. Okay, thank you, Carrie. And next we have Dr. John to just share some thoughts.
Right. Thanks, Sharon, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here to share a little bit on my thoughts. Cheryl and Melissa, to some extent, talk about Maybank. We talk about our mission of humanizing financial services. Some people will say that, oh, is that a narrative that we want to own to show that we are a good corporate citizen? Actually, no. I'd like to think it is actually reminding ourselves, working in an organization like a financial institution, Maybank, that we should think beyond just doing what we do, but to be a better human being. And if you actually look at what the role of financial institution is, the role of financial institution actually is to help develop economies. Right? We facilitate transactions, we facilitate borrowings, lending, and so on, to really develop economies. And when we talk about developing economies, it's about social well-being of people. But unfortunately, we forgot about that. If you know what happened to the global financial crisis, a lot of financial institutions forgot what was the role that they had to play. And we came out with this mission of humanizing financial services about 10 years ago to just remind ourselves that we have a bigger role to play than just creating wealth. And that's to be really to create social mobility, equality, financial inclusiveness, and so on. So that's really where what we want to focus. And some of you may ask, so why are we interested in this employability? Cheryl talks about what we do as a foundation. That's something we do as part of our CSR. But we want to take it away from just doing something as an afterthought, which is a lot of organizations do, which is corporate CSR and all that, to actually mainstream to what we do on a day-to-day basis. So if you actually look at some of the data, I asked Sharon to try to pull out some. In Singapore itself, you talk about disability, you talk about mature workers, you talk about mental health individuals, you talk about underprivileged women. You'd be surprised to find that a lot of people are still very marginalized. You think about a country like Singapore, supposed to be wealthy, successful, but all these people are forgotten. And why is that? It's sometimes because when we live in a success, you actually forget there's marginalized people, right? When we go to Cambodia, it's more obvious. You go to Laos, it's more obvious, and you do something about it. But in Singapore, you say, how can it be, right? It's not possible. But if you actually look at the data, you actually find that there are still many, many people in Singapore that are marginalized. So as a financial institution, we thought not only should we be doing something about it, what is one of our strengths? Our strength is not just us. Our strength is our network. To borrow, as I was sharing, to borrow the digital world, they talk about network effects, ecosystem. It's exactly the same thing. What's our network? Our network of customers. What's the ecosystem? Ecosystem of everyone that can employ. So we alone cannot do it, but collectively it's going to be very, very meaningful. And that's really where we're coming from. That's why we're very keen to push this. So moving to humanizing what I call from 1.0 to 2.0, to just not looking at financial inclusiveness, social development, but really to make it more sustainable, to make people, as they say, rather than give them the fish, teach them how to fish, so to speak. So that's what I'd like to share. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. John. And I think it's really true. Singapore is known as being a very affluent and developed country. But I think all the more the vulnerable communities are finding it hard to have that social mobility. I think DPM Taman also shared that social inequality and mobility is going to be one of our biggest challenges. So there are a lot of invisible groups that are finding it really hard to have social and economic participation, and therefore also, to move up and share in the progress. So before we go on to Leon, I'd like to also encourage you to join the Pigeonhole. There are 2 sessions, just want to remind everyone. Please feel free to contribute questions for the speakers as well. I see quite a few questions going on in the audience participation one, but please remember that we have a different window for questions for the speakers and panelists. Okay, so now moving on, we'd like to invite Leon, our Executive Director of Damson Capital and co-founder of Eden and Ellie. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharon. Real big thank you and shout out again to MVPC and Maybank for putting this together. I think it's just an amazing opportunity for us to be talking about the whole question of inclusivity in the way that different companies are approaching it. So I think Dr. John and Carrie have talked about the bigger pictures of the approach. So I'd like to show you a little bit of now that we understand the landscape, maybe I'll show you a little bit of what the picture of inclusive hiring looks like. And a little bit of my experience through 2 aspects. One, as an impact investor. In Damson Capital, as impact investors, we are essentially investing in companies financially who have a bottom line of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, my second aspect of my experience, which I'll be very, very proud to share with you as well, is Eden and Ellie, which is a jewelry company hiring autistic adults in Singapore. So with Damson Capital, that generally is also the view I get on a day-to-day basis going on the ground. This is one of my few opportunities that I actually dress up in a suit. So this is great, a great change. So for Damson Capital, I guess, the real question we're always asking is how do we balance out sustainable development? How do we do good and do well at the same time? Because we all now have a stereotypical perspective of what a corporate is and could be, should be, or by stigma, and not so much by potential. And we're asking ourselves, how do we swing it from one end to the other to make corporates a force for good as well? And in that regard, we have different aspects that we have to deal with, right? We've looked at different companies and tried to figure out how do we actually change and use startup companies, early stage companies, as a way of taking us forward in a positive way. So one of the companies that we looked at is Westbike. This is not in Singapore, but I want to start outside of the circle of Singapore first by going to Indonesia. Now Westbike, I don't know if we can click on this. Westbike is a courier service. It has pretty much a last mile delivery business, so similar to your Lala Move and your Fast and all that. The only difference is, if I could tell you that of the thousands of packages that get sent in Indonesia, we have an opportunity to actually send all the packages with 0 carbon footprint, with 0 fossil fuels burned. We don't burn any fossil fuels. And then, of course, the next question is like, seriously, how? Well, easiest point is we use bicycles. That's it. Now, then you say, bicycles? Is that really a good business? Like, seriously? And we say, yeah. Now, if I told you the headline numbers and it's verified that we deliver, on average, 2 to 3 times per courier more than a motorcyclist on a motorbike in Indonesia across 5 cities right now, would you believe me? Okay, no, everyone's saying no. Oh dear. Oh dear, I'm not selling this well, right? So they are already. They send between about anywhere between 6,000 to 7,000 packages a day across 5 cities. And on top of that, they are not only with the fossil fuel aspects of it on no carbon footprint, but they are also, show you that. That's okay. Let's skip ahead. And and if you look at the company, it looks very, very similar to most of us, right? It's just a logistics company. But if you actually dig deeper and looked at the people and the human aspect of it, on the left is Eric. And Eric actually, in childhood, suffered from polio, something we hardly hear about in Singapore as well. right? And it was very challenging for him growing up. And he was hired after, having difficulties. And then here he is today as a bicycle courier. But Rico is even better. Actually, on the left, Rico is actually deaf. And every day, if you think about a courier's journey, he not only has to cycle through traffic, the last bit of it, which is the most important actually to a customer service, is when he stands in front of the customer and has to tell him, here is your package, and here you need to sign. So what it's been doing for him is actually it's trained him to be a good lip reader, but also help him with his communication. And today he shows up to work and he's one of our champions, in Lampong, not even in Jakarta, going out there, and he's now the PIC, so he looks after the entire area of Lampong for our riders out there. So inclusiveness isn't so much for us a question of what can we put them into, but the question of where else can we actually get them to flourish. And that's been really interesting in looking at some of the businesses that we've been investing in. And this is one great one so far. On the opposite sense, I think coming closer to home is an example of Eden and Ellie. You can find us online, many places. Please go see and buy. I urge you strongly. Not that we're selling it, right? So for us at Eden and Ellie, the story is quite interesting. I joined as a late co-founder to the game. The Stephanie, who was the founder of Eden and Ellie, came to me with a proposal, and at that time it was already running for a year or so. And one thing I noticed about it was how beautiful the product was. And then I asked her, after I looked at the product, I said, so why are you a social enterprise? And then she said, because we actually have autistic adults who do the weaving for all the beads. So let me just go back one slide. So this is one of our white bangles. On average, these are seed beads, which are less than anywhere between 1 to 2 millimeters thick, all individually hand sewn by needle and thread, all done here in Singapore. And then we set it on 24K plated gold. The interesting thing about this is that the white bangle, which is our top of our line, has 3,260 beads in it. Very meticulously, beautifully done. Very delicate piece. And we do it all here in the Enabling Village in Singapore, where we have 10 of our artisans there, where they are specially designed space, where they actually have almost like when you walk into the room, it's like a bomb shelter. It's really thick doors. You don't want any noise to get in and out. And at the same time, the tables are all designed specifically so that it doesn't shake too much. So if one person has a bit of a meltdown, it doesn't affect somebody next to them. And the beautiful thing about that is that we're starting to track also what is the transformation on the individual. And today, we have the interesting thing when we try to qualify and quantify the impact. We have mothers who write back saying that, now our child can actually go to the MRT and take the train or the bus to work themselves. And that's massive. And the other bit being that, apart from one of the mothers who said, actually, my son gives me a $50 allowance now, which is great, right? Every month. So that's fantastic. But I think the reason why it was so fascinating in Eden and Ellie was because we were able to create a product where people loved. If you go into our marketing, you actually don't hear very much about the beneficiaries, about why you need to buy, but we wanted people to buy because you love the product. And when you got the product and you unpacked the piece out, you realize that it all came from an individual who had autism. And in a place like Singapore, where 1 in 150 adolescents actually are afflicted with some degree or spectrum of the autism, I think it is quite challenging because we've done very well at supporting them through school. But the challenge is, after you go through school, which provides you a structured learning environment, you lose that structure, which actually causes a lot of the regression to happen when they go out into the workforce. So this is where it gets challenging, and we're really trying to support them in this regard. So again, in all of this, inclusiveness for us is really about trying to support the idea of how do we actually bring strong interest of people in what they love to do. And the final story I would sit back and say is that when we actually hired one of the artisans, one of them actually was really loved beading. And she was very meticulous, and she really liked the work. And what we found out was that actually, before she joined, she was actually packing fruits in a grocery store. She would pick up an orange, and there's a small blemish on it, and she'll put it away, and she says, we cannot sell this, it's not perfect. And then when she came to us, it was the best thing ever, because she would pick up a bead, which is so small that even I can't see, and she says, Mr. Employer, this bead has a chip. And you look at it, and I stare at it, and I cannot see it. And she can, and that's the most beautiful thing, that when you can actually bring that interest, the being to the job, it's the kind of job where they don't need to go home. They don't have to fear being out of the house. They want to be there. And we can actually provide that kind of opportunities by just a little tweak. And suddenly, they're a very different person altogether. And hopefully, it comes back to the house where they become more transformed. So, yeah. So I'll leave it there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leon. And before we move on, we do have some audience questions. One of it is, how much is the bangle?
Wow, the bangle. So who asked that? Gosh, I'm not supposed to be talking about that.
2 votes for that question.
2 votes for the question. Okay. So the white bangle actually is in the upper 300 to 400 range. So you can actually find that. A lot of our pieces start from $98 all the way up. These are all 24K plated gold pieces. We have men's line which have sterling silver and leather bracelets as well, where we use full grain Spanish leather. And those go for about $139, roughly.
Okay, there you have it. So Eden and Ellie's is also set up in M-Space. We have a little pop-up booth. So that's also one of the ways we try to support social enterprises. If there are any of you that are interested, please feel free to reach out to me. So just some thoughts from your sharing, Leon. I think that firstly, looking at the workspace, right? Whenever we think about job accommodation or workplace accommodation, we think like, oh, is it very difficult? Do I have to change or do a lot of renovations to do that? But I think from what we saw in the picture, it was actually very simple. They just had like little signage cards that say, don't use bad beads. Okay, so good beats only. And I think that's also our experience at Maybank. We have a couple of staff that have disabilities as well. And, the simple accommodations that we made were things like, building a ramp, having doors that are more accessible, or even magnifying screens for contact center staff. So it may not be as, forbidding as you think. It can be really, really simple measures that we can take. So moving on, we'll like to invite Shimin to share from her perspectives from race.
Okay, thank you for having me. I'm very glad to be here and to see so many of you being interested in this area. So my name is Simin, I'm from RACE. Just give a little background, RACE is actually started in 2015. What we do is we develop the social enterprise sector in Singapore. So what's social enterprises? Maybe just to share, we basically believe that we use business as a medium, as a mode to do good, to deliver social impact. So like what Dr. John says, we hope to mainstream doing good. We hope that the ideal situation is everyone plays a part and using business because business is sustainable. It's something that drives the economy. And we do not want to just put them aside to say doing good is mutually exclusive from doing well in your business. So as a sector developer, we provide a range of services and support to nurture new social enterprises to start, and also enable existing ones to grow and become sustainable. So we are also a membership body. We have more than 350 members across different business sectors. And we always talk about having competitive products and services, like what Leon says, right? When people look at it, they look at it as a company. And we work with corporates, government agencies, intermediaries to actually advocate and garner support for social enterprises. So example, like thanks to Maybank, one of our SE, Adrenaline, is actually the events management. So the people who you see taking photos and all this, they're also social enterprise. So they hire the vulnerable group. But we don't see them as that, right? That's like what Leon says, we don't sell that way. And inclusive hiring, I mean, hearing from all the different panels, what does it mean to us at RAISE? Is deliberate efforts taken to consider everyone's capabilities, evaluate them objectively, and also ensuring there's a conducive environment for people of all abilities to thrive in. So it's not just the hiring process. We are talking about policy changes, maybe at HR level, and maybe working environment, your colleagues, because it is not inclusive employment is not about giving a job. It's actually enabling them to regain or to have their dignity. For some, we have a diverse group of vulnerable communities in Singapore. So of course for some, maybe low-income family or this, employment to them is really getting a livelihood, getting paid. But we talk about those with persons with special needs. Actually, this is giving them a dignity that is not a charity handout. It's something that they do, they find meaning, and they find joy in doing that. Like they come to work being very happy. When we talk to all our other social enterprises members, that's what they share with us. They say the difference is that most of us would probably dread going to work. Therefore, there's Monday blues. But for some of them, going to work is really their socializing time, doing something and making friends. So I think that to us is what we would like to stand for. Like inclusive hiring is really just more than giving a contract or work. And it's actually very close to the social enterprises because when in the early 2000s, social enterprises were seen as alternative employment opportunities to the disadvantaged Singaporeans. And even up to today, as the social issues evolve, they increase in their complexity. Provision of employment opportunity remain as our top impact area by our social enterprise members. In fact, about 30% of them chose this as a top impact, primary impact area. So we can see how employment actually brings along a lot of ripple effect. Beside getting your monthly paycheck, you get friends. I mean, after all, we spend more time at work than outside with our friends. So yeah, I mean, I will stop here and so that we can continue the other questions.
Okay, thank you. So I think you brought up a good point that it is not just about getting a job, it's not just getting a salary, but giving them their dignity back. But you also mentioned another point on, that it's not just the hiring process, but also policy changes. So I think this is something that's interesting, and we have a question that maybe you can take a stab at it, and after that, maybe we can get Carrie to also share her thoughts. So this question, I'm having a bit of trouble here. Okay, so my question is, what do businesses need before they embark on inclusive hiring? And maybe you shared just now on policy changes that are needed. So perhaps Carrie can give her thoughts on, how about for the single mothers, what kind of special support do they need or special arrangements that need to be made before companies can think of working with this group?
Thanks for the question. I think it's a really good opportunity for us to delve a little bit more in depth about the barriers of single mothers. I mentioned earlier about childcare, and we know that childcare in Singapore is available 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So imagine if you're a single parent, and often these families, they don't really have that network of support around them because their own parents might be very frazzled with life, have their own problems to settle, etc. So what we created really is a platform of community support, and that's in line with my earlier point about social participation and social connectedness. We realized that after putting the women into a job, so many of them fell off or had to either resign, or sometimes they were terminated within the first 1 to 3 months because of contingency that arise at home. Even if they were they had a kid in a childcare center, if someone's running a fever, who does the teacher call, right? So they call the mom. And where does mom go to look for support? So last year, we actually embarked on a journey called the Community Childminding Program, where we are harnessing women from the rental estates who are staying home to help to look after their neighbors' children, so that there's a kampong of support, so that those who wish to go out to work, they can leave their kids with a neighbor or another woman or a peer living close to her whom she trusts. So this is something that at a community level we're trying to build. And I think coming back to the question about what do businesses need to do first before they embark on inclusive hiring. Recently, we had the case of a very ambitious employer partner. They were very helpful, and he really wanted to hire a group of our women at one go because he had hiring needs. And I think the lesson we learned from this experience with him is start with small steps. I think when it comes to hiring someone who's different, there is a learning journey. And when you just hire one, it gives you ample time to figure out, how can I get my team and my workplace and my peers and my colleagues to understand how it feels like to work with someone who's a bit different from us and has different needs. How can we adjust? What are the things that we need to reflect on? It doesn't matter if it takes a bit longer, but I think it's important that the company as a whole goes on that journey together and has the opportunity to get better with empathy, to get better with, understanding people's constraints before, they start hiring more. Because I think we are also very cognizant of the fact that sometimes when you do inclusive hiring, the individual may not be able to perform at the same rate as everyone else. There is also a transition and learning period for them. So this is a strategy basically that can minimize any negative operational impact on whether it's the team or the company if they want to start. So although we would love the enthusiasm, I think our advice is really to start with small steps first and really take the pain to walk the journey with someone. And I think there's a lot of tremendous growth, and it also builds a very good and inclusive, empathetic workplace culture for the rest of the team. Instead of sometimes the reality is your colleagues may feel like, why are you imposing this burden on us, right? If they don't really understand the constraints, yeah.
Sorry, maybe I jump in here a bit. So I totally echo that. I think it's about baby steps that we want, not going all out to change. And some baby steps that we talk about could be as simple as actually increasing the awareness of the diverse communities we have in Singapore. You may not have started hiring, but at least increase the awareness and the understanding of the company towards different groups of people, so that when you are going to start really hiring the very first one, people are ready. So your company is ready for it. Therefore, it has a conducive environment, because we wouldn't want them to come in and everyone is having a shock. It's like a trauma together for the new hire as well as the existing colleagues. I think that's number one. And the other things to think about could be, depending on how big your company is, how comfortable are you with certain flexible work arrangements? Do you talk about working from home, flexible working hours, or even job sharing for a lot of communities, especially the special needs group, multiple people to deliver single job, so that we are not expecting them to deliver one-to-one job. Areas like that. And one more thing that I think we always highly encourage everyone, especially our social enterprises, is to work with partners, with social service agencies, because work is one part of their life. They may need a lot of other support, like what Carrie mentioned about childminding. That is actually a very important part for them to be ready to be hired. Because if they cannot resolve these fundamental issues, no matter how willing we are to hire them, there will be a dropout. The retention will be very low because their bread and butter issues are not being resolved. So yeah, work with social service agencies. I think that will be the best way.
Okay, so riding on that sharing, we have a question from the audience, and I think maybe Leon or Dr. John can take a stab at it. So this question is, we hired a young man with disability for data entry, but it didn't work out well and we stopped because of work attitude and multiple absenteeism. So the question is, how can we manage and do this better? Leon, maybe you want to share based on your experience?
Okay, let's start with the elephant in the room. It's hard, right? Thank you. Look, it's not an easy start, right? To hire someone with who is differently able. How about that? So how I think of it is just how we sometimes it's a factor of different things, but we like especially with the suggestion from Ray's, we work with a partner called ERC, the Autism Resource Center, and they actually support us with job coaches and training. And I still often have to, send my staff for training with ERC to be constantly reminded what does it mean to be working with an adult with autism. And I think there are very simple ways of tackling it, but it's also about having the right ecosystem and support system for a person who comes in for data entry. Now, again, each individual is always very different. I used to be a consultant, and when I had to convince my boss for a certain budget, I would have to draw up slides, talk about the business case, this, business case that, all the numbers and all sorts, and then I present it to him in a very nice form in slides. Right? Today we have a job coach, which I adore so much, who found a artisan who, for example, was only producing one type of pattern. And I think she really liked the Peranakan weave, for example. So she kept doing it again and again. Every time she wasn't given that pattern, she was very upset. And at some point, every time we asked her to try something new, it didn't happen. So back and forth, it was a male artisan. And at some point, the job coach realized that this artisan really liked Mario Brothers. I don't know if you're familiar with cartoon characters, but Mario Brothers, the video game, their characters is Mario and Luigi. And so they draw out this comic strip of Mario going to buy jewelry from Luigi, because Mario needs it for the queen, right, the princess. And at some point, he buys one piece of jewelry, goes away, he's very happy, goes back again, and then buys the same, and asks to buy another different type of jewelry, and Luigi couldn't sell it because they only make one type of jewelry. And then suddenly the artisan went, oh, all right, okay, and something clicked, and then 2 weeks later, started producing other types of weaves and patterns. So I think the communication style is very different. Sometimes for us as employers, I'm out the door very quickly, in and out sometimes. Sometimes it's not for me to tell, but a lot of the people that we can empower and give that opportunity to be observant, to understand that kind of paradigm of communication, and at the same time partnering with the right people, gave us the right kind of grounding to communicate. Not just a shared vision, but a shared value of why we needed them to be this way. But at the same time, our promotion standards for the artisan was that if they could learn a different pattern, we could actually promote them, get more money. Great, but they don't see it that way. So that's not the right incentive. The incentive has to be different. So I think partnering with different individuals helps a lot.
No, it was interesting trying to think through all the conversation and so we talk about problems, we talk about success. So one thing that kind of sort of came to my mind was perhaps we need to relook at how we define job. Not, when we traditional view of work is that we have a box, we want to fill that box, we want to be inclusive, we hire someone to fill that box, then we don't find it to work. Maybe we need to redefine the box. Maybe we need to look at what job is. To some of the success was if we bring the right job to the right people, it will work. So we just need to maybe put more effort in trying to redefine a job and find the right people to that job. And one organization can do that. So I think collectively, obviously, we can define more jobs and more variety, more differences. Then we can bring more jobs to some of these people. But if we try to fit one to the organization, I think it's going to be a challenge.
Right, and I think Carrie has something to add. And I think you also indirectly answered the one tip you would share to operationalize inclusive hiring. So thanks for that. Carrie, please share.
Yeah, I love Dr. John's comment about rethinking and redefining jobs, right? And I know, when I saw the topic employability, recently there's been this whole conversation about the future of work. And I think in Chinese, there's this term called 危机. In any time of challenge, you actually see the opportunity. So we actually see the opportunity. And I'd like to encourage people to think about the future of work. Instead of work, how about the future of care? Because technology and automation is going to help businesses save a lot of cost. And I think being, humanized businesses, social enterprises, businesses doing ESG, how can we effectively translate those cost savings into reinvestment into people, right? A lot of the jobs out there are going to be automated. Machines are going to do it. And I think in the future, when we go to work, we may no longer go to work trying to perform a productivity function. We're going to work to create more creativity, create more innovation, create more care. And I think this is the opportunity where we can deploy cost savings from technology to invest in people and to look at people differently. I think one of the key pioneering effort we made at DOT recently was to discover, or rather channel the low-income women into the sector of elder care, right? Which is, aging society, we have so much an increasing need for care. And people are asking, do we need to deploy robots to look after our old people? I think, yes, the robots are there, right? Maybe the robots can perform the function of a reminder, take your medicine. But I think before we look into robots, there's so many other humans who could do the work of care so much better. And I think there is tremendous potential when robots or technology take over the mechanics or mechanized functions of society, that it leaves more room, energy, and money and resources to be invested in how can we value people more and care for them better. So this is something that I want to encourage people to think about. And I take heart from the fact that, going forward, the social services, social workers, people with high skills in empathy, community building, connections are going to actually be relatively less replaceable by robots. So if you think about employability, I think cultivating the values and skills of care is going to safeguard you against the future of work crisis. Thank you.
I think that's very well said. And before we wrap up and look at the audience responses, I just have one more question from the audience, and maybe Doc can answer this. How can businesses continue to do good and stay afloat if we go into a recession? And that's the top-rated question.
I don't see do good as something that you do if you think of doing good as a charity, then there's the disconnect. So I don't think you should see do good as something that you have to, as I say, put aside money to do. I think if you can embed it into your business, it will make sense. We at Maybank, for example, like say when we look at the humanizing, it's not about we want to tell the world that we are a good company, but we actually want to remind ourselves we should be doing good. And I think by doing that, we actually give better customer service. We actually there's more apathy for our customers, and that leads to more profit, more sustainable business, and so on. So I think we just need to look at it differently, as opposed to saying, it's something we have to do and put money aside, and therefore it's recession, then we can't do it, right? Yeah.
And Leon, from an impact investor perspective. I know.
Sorry, so I think from an impact investor, one of the most rewarding things about being an impact investor is seeing all these different ideas about social enterprises, or just the way people approach inclusivity with different marginalized communities or people in need. And one of the most interesting things about a lot of the different types of businesses that we see is that they have to be they tend to be very customer-centric. That's one. They tend to be very empathetic. That's two. And number three is that they're actually highly resourceful and innovative. And I suspect that, for me, those are the three main characteristics that we invest on the basis of. So if it came down to the flexibility and the nimbleness or the ability to adapt to change, like the recession, we feel that, we're very confident about our portfolio companies, and even myself as a co-founder of Eden and Ellie, that we would continue to be able to provide value for customers first and foremost that happens to translate to revenue, turnover, and our bottom line, right? So I think if very much like what Dr. John said, right? If you focus on the right aspects of business, then everything comes with it. And it naturally becomes the best kind of competitive advantage in the long run as well.
Okay, thank you so much. And let's just take a look now at the audience, the question that we asked you, the audience. Many of you have commented. So the question is, besides existing programs and funds, what else is needed for companies or clients to support more inclusive hiring practices or to improve the working environment? So these are some of the responses to remove barriers and misconceptions, to change the mindset among the team members. I think that's a big one there. To have more education and awareness, and quite a bit on culture change. The last one is on taking a multi-pronged approach across the value chain. I think that's actually a good thing that any company can do. For example, at Maybank, when we host events, we try to engage social enterprises where it's possible to do so. Even the tokens today that we made are actually from Tinkle Arts that hires clients from mines. So these are the little things that any company can do. You don't have to immediately jump into the deep blue sea, right? So to end off, I'd just like to invite all the panelists to share in one line, what can your organization give, or what support do you need? So we'll start with Carrie.
I was discussing this with Fanny outside earlier. What do we want to ask of you? In line with what I earlier mentioned about preparedness and being sensitized or understanding the needs of the community before you hire them, I think we'd like to do a shout out and a plug for Company of Good. Please join the programs that MVPC has, especially the Fellowship for Good program. We found that partnering with the graduates of this program and the fellows have really helped to smoothen out the partnership and collaboration journey. I think whether you're a company wanting to hire the women or differently abled, whether you are a company that wants to embark on a CSR journey, it's a great program. You can understand, have more insight before you actually start work with us. And of course, we always need funds, so please support the Maybank Inspire Good campaign. We are one of the charities listed there. Do scan your QR code, do a good deed, and Maybank will give us $5. So, yes. So thank you for your support.
Ladies first, I guess. I think the ask I have is that for everyone to really come together to discuss how we can make things happen, make a change. Maybe you feel that as a single company, maybe you think that I'm an SME, I'm small, I can't make the difference, but I think together we can. So that's the ask I have, like the same ask that I gave Melissa, say, let's work together because we are actually targeting the same group of people. What we can give at RAISE is that we do have fundings available for our social enterprises members. And also we acknowledge and recognizes the challenges in hiring. We are actually starting a series of masterclass to talk about how to hire the vulnerable communities in terms of how do you attract them and employ them, legal considerations, policy consideration, as well as retention. How do we keep them happy at the job? So yeah, that's for me.
Yeah.
What can you give, or what do you need?
Very astute. Okay, so I think what we can definitely give, as practitioners is very much experience. We're always very open to sharing and supporting anybody who wants to come into the space within your own means as well. I think I hope it has spread the idea that SMEs are not only the bedrock for the economy, but also the whole idea that if we really want to have the seismic shift, it will have to come from the SMEs. And it's so important because then that's where we really, the small bits become the big wave, and that's the big journey that we're looking for. So I think yeah, so that's one thing I definitely think we can bring. What's the other part?
So this is something that we've been talking in Maybank. We want to bring inclusiveness to beyond just our organization. We want to bring inclusiveness to all our partners, and obviously our biggest partners is our customers. So the word I use, create the network effect to bring inclusiveness to all. One organization is not going to be meaningful, but if you imagine we can bring hundreds of organizations, obviously it's going to be more meaningful. So we can be essentially the facilitator of that process to get more of our customers into this journey.
Okay, thank you so much. And talking about funding and support, do check out the materials by SG Enable at the back if you want to think about hiring persons with disabilities. They also have a survey, a self-help survey that you can take to see how ready your company is to hire someone with disabilities. And I think we're very happy, and thank you to all our panelists for your thoughts and sharing. We will collate the responses and send to everyone that's here today so that you can also mull over them at your own time. Thank you to everyone that has attended this event, especially our customers. We hope that it's useful, and if you have any further questions, just let us know.